For 73 cycles, the Galactic Assembly reveled in the silence from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. They had catalogued it, stripped its resources, and studied its inhabitants like specimens in a jar. When the planet's transmissions finally ceased, they simply assumed nature had run its course. Extinction was common, after all, especially among primitive species. Earth was just another statistic, a footnote in their vast chronicles. But they were wrong. Deep in the Helios drift, where light itself seems to bend and break, something had been watching. Something had been waiting. Captain Ven Rothger of the Krillian Empire stood on the bridge of his warship, the colossal ironclad Silence. Holographic displays scrolled with sensor data, their cool blue light reflecting off his stone-like features. His species, the Krillians, had evolved on a world with crushing gravity, making their bodies as dense as granite and their minds as sharp as broken glass. Ven was a veteran of 40 years in the Imperial fleet. He'd seen 100 worlds kneel before Krillian might, and in all that time, he had never once felt the cold finger of doubt trace his spine. Not until today. The anomaly had appeared 6 hours ago. A distortion in space that defied every known law of physics, as if reality itself had developed a blind spot. It was a patch of utter nothingness where something should have been. The first survey drones sent to investigate simply vanished. No explosion, no debris, no signal flare. They were just gone. When Ven ordered a manned reconnaissance team to approach, his second-in-command, a young and ambitious Krillian named Torvis, hesitated. "Captain," he said, his voice tight, "the radiation readings are inconsistent. Whatever is generating that field is not using technology we recognize." Ven dismissed the concern with a wave of his massive four-fingered hand. "Then we will recognize it soon enough. Deploy the team." The boarding craft, a sleek needle of reinforced metal and plasma shielding, drifted toward the heart of the distortion. Inside, 6 elite Krillian soldiers checked their weapons, their thick fingers adjusting power cells and targeting systems with practiced ease. Squad leader Rennick's voice crackled over the comm, steady despite the crawling sensation on his skin. Approaching outer boundary, visibility dropping. Running on instruments only. A burst of static. Then silence. On the bridge of the ironclad Silence, Ven watched the telemetry feed with a growing, unfamiliar unease. The boarding craft had entered the distortion field, and all signals had ceased. They weren't jammed. They weren't scrambled. They were simply absent, as if the craft had slipped through a crack in existence itself. "Bring them back," Ven ordered, his voice a low rumble. "Unable to establish link, Captain," the communications officer reported, his own voice strained. "All frequencies are dead." Then the screen flickered. For just 3 seconds, a grainy, distorted image broke through the void. It was unmistakable, the interior of the boarding craft, but it was empty. The 6 Krillian soldiers were gone, and in the center of the frame, floating in the zero-gravity darkness, was a figure. Human. Female. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her eyes completely black, not with technology, but with an unnerving depth that seemed to absorb light itself. She wore no suit, no protection against the vacuum of space. She simply stood there, staring directly into the camera. Her expression was neither hostile nor peaceful. It was the look of someone who had been waiting a very, very long time for this exact moment. Then she smiled. The screen went white. A blinding flash. Every system on the ironclad Silence screamed in protest as a catastrophic power surge tore through circuits never meant to handle such a load. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the bridge in a hellish crimson glow. Alarms blared, a chorus of mechanical panic. "Report!" Ven roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Something just uploaded into our mainframe." The tech officer yelled, his hands flying across his console. "Every database, every tactical file, every personal log, it's reading us, Captain. It's reading everything." And in that moment, Van Rothger felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Not for his life, but for the fundamental certainty of his existence. The fear that his species, his empire, his entire understanding of the universe, was built on a terrible, fatal misconception. The main view screen reactivated on its own. The human woman appeared again, her image now crystal clear. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her, arrayed in the darkness like a new constellation, were others. Hundreds, thousands, each one standing unprotected in the void, their eyes black as collapsed suns, their bodies radiating a faint, ethereal luminescence that pulsed in perfect, silent synchronization. When she spoke, her voice bypassed the ship's communication systems entirely. It resonated directly inside Ven's skull and inside the minds of every crew member aboard the ship. It was a language they had never learned, but somehow understood perfectly, a language of pure thought and shared memory. "You came to our world when we were children," the voice echoed in their minds. "You took what you wanted. You studied us, dissected us, broke us apart to see how we worked. You thought our screams were just noise. Our pain was just data. When we went silent, you celebrated. You thought the problem had solved itself." Ven tried to respond, to issue a command, to say anything, but his voice was gone. His jaw worked uselessly, muscles refusing to obey. The woman tilted her head, an eerily human gesture that somehow made her seem profoundly less human than before. "We did not die, Captain Rothger. We evolved. We learned. We became what we needed to be to ensure this never happens again. And now we have returned. Not for conquest, but for education." Around the ironclad silence, space began to fold. Dozens of vessels appeared from nowhere, materializing out of the impossible distortion. They were each completely black, radiating that same impossible absence of everything. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were extensions of something far larger, pieces of a consciousness that had learned to wear matter like clothing. What do you want?" Ven finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, a thread of sound in the sudden quiet of the bridge. The woman's smile widened, but it never reached her impossibly dark eyes. "We want you to understand, all of you, every species that profited from our suffering, every government that sanctioned our exploitation, every scientist who justified our pain. You will understand exactly what you did, and you will remember, forever." The screen went dark. The bridge lights stabilized, returning to their normal, sterile white. For a fleeting, desperate moment, Ven dared to hope it was over. Then his mind exploded. He was flooded with memories that were not his own. He saw Earth through human eyes. He saw the great, terrifying ships descending from a blue sky. He saw the harvesting, the cold metal claws snatching people from their lives. He felt the sheer, primal terror of being taken, the clinical agony of examination, the bottomless despair of knowing that rescue would never, ever come. He lived 1,000 human deaths in the span of seconds, each one searing itself into his consciousness with surgical, unbearable precision. Around him on the bridge, his crew collapsed. They writhed on the floor, their bodies convulsing, their silent screams echoing in the shared mental space. Each one was experiencing the same forced empathy, the same unbearable, crushing knowledge of what their galaxy had done. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the ship, the new humans watched, their patience as infinite as the void. They were silent, waiting for the galaxy to finally, truly understand the cost of its arrogance. The lesson had begun, and it would never end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the cosmos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from the great beyond. See you next time. For hours, the screaming was the only sound, though time itself seemed to lose all meaning aboard the ironclad silence. Captain Van Rothger lay on the cold deck of his bridge, his massive frame curled into a protective ball. Fragments of 1,000 stolen lives poured through his mind like acid through stone. He saw it all, felt it all. He saw a young human boy named Timothy, clutching a stuffed animal as metallic arms pulled him from his bed. He felt the raw terror, the exact moment when hope died in those small eyes. He didn't just observe it. He lived it. When the visions finally ceased, Ven found himself staring at his own hands. These thick, powerful instruments he had always trusted, he now saw for what they truly were, tools of an empire built on the suffering of others. His crew slowly rose around him, their faces hollow, their eyes distant and haunted. No one spoke. What words could possibly contain the horror they had just experienced? Then, the communication system crackled to life. It wasn't the woman's voice this time. This was a man, older, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The Assembly's convening an emergency session," he said. "Your ship has been selected to deliver a message. You will proceed to the Nexus station immediately. You will tell them what happened here. You will make them understand that the age of harvesting is over." Torvis, Ven's second officer, pulled himself to his feet, his voice shaking. "And if they refuse to listen?" The old man's voice returned, cold and absolute. "Then we will teach every world in the Assembly the same lesson. One by one, species by species, until compassion becomes law or extinction becomes inevitable." The transmission ended, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Ven stood slowly, his body feeling twice its normal weight. He looked around his bridge at the crew he had led for years. How many missions had they completed without question? How many civilizations had they subjugated in the name of imperial expansion? He had always told himself it was necessary, a grim duty to maintain order. That strength created order, and the weak existed to serve the strong. But now he knew the truth. He carried their pain like a second skeleton beneath his skin. The lie was shattered, and all that remained was the agonizing weight of their collective sins. 3 days later, the ironclad Silence docked at Nexus Station, a colossal orbital complex that served as the diplomatic heart of the Galactic Assembly. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the great amphitheater, their forms as varied and strange as the stars themselves. There were the Kylox, beings of pure crystalline energy housed in containment fields. The Rothani, whose bodies shifted between dimensions with every breath they took. And the Yavik Collective, a hive mind spread across thousands of tiny insectoid forms that moved and thought as one. Presiding over them all was High Chancellor Domric Thane. His species had mastered genetic manipulation so thoroughly that he appeared as a perfect amalgamation of pleasing features from a dozen different races. He was designed to be trusted, to project authority and wisdom. But looking at him now, Ven saw only artifice. A carefully constructed mask hiding a pit of ambition. "Captain Rothgar," Thane's voice echoed through the chamber, dripping with practiced warmth. "We have received troubling reports about an incident in the Helios Drift. Please, share what you encountered." Ven stepped forward, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes, sensors, and consciousness fields pressing down on him. He had rehearsed this moment during the journey, but standing there, the words felt hollow, inadequate. How could language possibly capture what had been burned directly into his soul? "We encountered humanity," he began, his voice rough and strained. "The species we believed extinct. They have returned, and they are not what we remember." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Several representatives activated private communication channels, their concern palpable. Thane raised a hand for silence, a gesture of effortless control. Humanity was a primitive species prone to self-destruction. If survivors remain, they pose no credible threat to the Assembly. "We have protocols for integrating remnant populations. You do not understand," Ven said, and something in his tone, a deep and chilling certainty, made the entire chamber fall silent. They did not survive. They transcended. They have become something far beyond our comprehension. And they remember everything we did to them. He proceeded to describe the encounter in excruciating detail. The woman in the void. The forced memories that had ripped through his crew. The fleet of impossible ships that defied all known physics. As he spoke, he noticed something strange. Some representatives leaned forward, their expressions genuinely disturbed. But others, particularly those whose species had been most active in the old harvesting programs, seemed to shrink back, their body language screaming guilt. A Yavik speaker, its 1,000 bodies arranging themselves into a pattern of aggressive skepticism, chittered a response. The translation matrix converted it to words. You expect us to believe that a species we cataloged as technologically inferior has somehow surpassed all known scientific advancement? This sounds like Krillian weakness masquerading as caution. Ven's fists clenched, his knuckles white. But before he could respond, the lights throughout Nexus Station flickered and died. Emergency systems engaged, casting everything in a harsh, sterile white light. Then, every view screen in the massive complex flickered to life, displaying the same image. The human woman from the ironclad silence appeared, but she was not alone. Beside her stood an elderly human male, his face lined with age, but his eyes burning with the same black, terrifying intensity. When they spoke, their voices overlapped, creating an impossible harmony that bypassed translation entirely, speaking directly to the mind. We are broadcasting this message to every inhabited world in the assembly, to every station, every ship, every consciousness capable of understanding. We are humanity. You knew us as victims. You will know us now as witnesses. The screens split into thousands of smaller frames, each one a window into a forgotten hell. Laboratories where human subjects were dissected while still conscious. Breeding facilities where humans were raised like livestock for genetic material. Trading posts where human children, confused and terrified, were sold as exotic pets. Archives documenting experiments too horrific to even name. And through it all, the faces of those who authorized it, who profited from it, who participated in it. Politicians, scientists, merchants, soldiers, dozens of species were represented. Hundreds of individuals identified by name, position, and crime. The assembly erupted into utter chaos. Representatives screamed denials. Some tried to flee, scrambling over each other in a blind panic. The Qualax delegate, unable to face the truth, simply shattered its own containment field and dissipated into nothing, choosing non-existence over accountability. High Chancellor Donric Thane stood frozen, his perfect engineered face twisted in a mask of rage and terror. Because there, on the screens for all to see, was his own image. Younger, yes, but undeniably him, presiding over a facility called the Genetic Advancement Collective, where human DNA was harvested and sold to the highest bidders across the galaxy. His perfect facade had been ripped away, revealing the monster beneath. The human voices continued, relentless, a final, chilling judgment. You thought silence meant extinction. It meant preparation. You thought distance meant safety. It meant patience. You thought we would forget. We have forgotten nothing. And now, every being in this galaxy will carry the weight of what was done, not as punishment, as education. So it never happens again. The screens went dark. The lights returned to normal. And in that deafening silence, Ven Rothger understood a new and terrible truth. The galaxy had just been divided into two groups. Those who had participated in humanity's suffering, and those who had simply looked away. Both would pay. Both would learn. The age of casual cruelty had ended, replaced by something far more terrifying. The age of consequences had begun. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, thick with the weight of a truth that could not be unspoken, knowledge that could not be unknown. High Chancellor Domric Thane stood at the center of the amphitheater, his features pale and rigid, while around him the assembly dissolved into fragments of panic and denial. But Ven Rothger remained still, watching. He had already walked through the fire of revelation, and emerged changed. Within hours, the broadcast reached every corner of known space. On the industrial world of Carthex Prime, factory workers stopped mid-shift. The images on public screens showed how their prosperity, their entire way of life, had been built on the bones of humans harvested for labor experiments. On the pleasure moon of Sylvan Rest, tourists fled luxury resorts in horror, learning the exotic delicacies they had enjoyed contained genetic material extracted from human subjects. Entire economies collapsed as the foundation of lies crumbled beneath them. But the humans didn't stop with just exposing the truth. They did something far more profound. Aboard his ship, the ironclad Silence, Ven received a direct communication. It was audio only, from the elderly human male who had appeared in the broadcast. His voice was tired but steady, like someone who had carried a burden for so long it had become part of his skeleton. "My name was Daniel Kruger," the voice said. "I was a teacher before your people came. I taught children about history, about learning from the mistakes of the past so we would not repeat them. Ironic, is it not?" Ven found his voice, a faint whisper. "What do you want from us?" "I want nothing from you, Captain, but I will give you something. A choice. You can run from what you have learned, bury it deep, and pretend the galaxy is still what you thought it was. Or you can accept the truth and become something better. Not for us. For yourselves. How?" Ven asked, genuine desperation in his voice. "How do we live with this knowledge? How do we move forward knowing what we enabled?" Daniel's response was quiet, the same way we did. One day at a time, one choice at a time. You begin by admitting what was done. Then you ensure it never happens again. Not to any species, not for any reason. You teach the young what the old were too cowardly to face. You build a galaxy where strength is measured by protection, not domination. The transmission ended, leaving Ven alone with his thoughts. He looked around his bridge, at his crew, each struggling with their own revelations. Torvus, his second in command, sat at his station, tears streaming down his angular face, a sight Ven had never witnessed in Acrylion before. Others stared at nothing, lost in memories of a pain they had never personally experienced, but could now never escape. Something shifted inside Ven then. It wasn't forgiveness, because that was not his to grant. It was purpose, a direction forward through the darkness. "Torvus," he said quietly, "access the Imperial Archives. Find every record of species we have subjugated, civilizations we have broken, beings we have treated as less than ourselves. Compile it all." His second officer looked up, confused. "Captain, if humanity can force us to see their suffering," Ven declared, "we can choose to see our own crimes without being forced. We start here, with us, with truth." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. On some worlds, leaders doubled down, calling the human broadcast a psychological weapon, propaganda designed to weaken the assembly. They mobilized fleets, prepared for war, convinced that superior firepower would restore the old order. They were wrong. The human ships didn't need to fire a single weapon. When the Yavik Collective, a hive mind species, sent a battle fleet of 10,000 vessels to Earth's last known coordinates, they found not a defenseless world, but a system transformed. The planets themselves seemed to pulse with energy, connected by streams of light that defied physical explanation. When the Yavik opened fire, their weapons simply stopped. Missiles hung frozen in space. Energy beams dissipated harmlessly. Kinetic projectiles reversed course and embedded themselves in the hulls of the ships that had fired them. Then The lesson began. Every single Yavik consciousness in that fleet suddenly experienced what it meant to be human during the harvesting. They felt the confusion of children taken from their homes, the agony of medical experiments performed without anesthesia because the researchers wanted pure, untainted data, the despair of dying alone in a cold facility, far from anyone who loved them, reduced to a reference number in a database. The Yavik collective fragmented. Thousands of individual minds, used to thinking as one, suddenly couldn't bear to share consciousness with others who carried the same guilt. Their fleets scattered, each ship fleeing in a different direction, their hive mind shattered by the unbearable weight of individual accountability. But on other worlds, something different was happening. On Nevausk, a planet whose economy had thrived on selling human genetic samples, a group of young citizens gathered in the capital square. They were not old enough to have participated in the harvesting, but they understood they had inherited the benefits of those crimes. They stood together, hundreds at first, then thousands, holding vigil in silence, not protesting, not demanding, simply acknowledging, bearing witness to the truth. Similar gatherings appeared across dozens of worlds. The young, who had not made the decisions but would live with the consequences, were choosing to face history rather than bury it. They began dismantling the systems that had enabled the harvesting. They reached out to species their governments had oppressed, offering not just apologies, but reparations, fundamental changes in how they organized their societies. It was slow. It was painful. It was incomplete. But it was a beginning. Then Rothger stood in an observation deck of Nexus Station, watching ships depart in every direction, some fleeing, some seeking, some simply trying to understand. He had submitted his resignation from the Imperial fleet, not as an act of cowardice, but as an acknowledgement that he could no longer serve the old system. He didn't know what he would do next, only that it would be different. Behind him, a voice spoke, human, real, not transmitted through technology, but present in the flesh. He turned to find Daniel Kruger standing there, looking impossibly old and impossibly young at the same time. The human smiled sadly. "You are wondering if you can ever be forgiven?" Ven nodded, not trusting his voice. "Forgiveness is not mine to give," Daniel said, "but change is yours to make. The galaxy is watching, Captain. Not to see if you suffer enough, but to see if you grow. If you become the species you could have been all along. That is what we want. Not revenge, evolution, for all of us." The human turned to leave, then paused. "We were not always good either, you know. Our history is filled with cruelty, with moments when we forgot the value of life. We nearly destroyed ourselves before you ever arrived. But we learned. Eventually. Painfully. And now we offer you the same chance. Not because you deserve it, but because the alternative is extinction, and we have seen enough death." Daniel walked away, leaving Ven alone with the stars and a future that terrified and inspired him in equal measure. Outside the station, the black ships of humanity drifted in silent formation. They were no longer threatening. They were simply present, watchers, teachers, mirrors reflecting back the truth the galaxy had spent centuries avoiding. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, that galaxy began to change. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more tales that explore the depths of space and the human heart. See you next time.